Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Edge. My name is Sam Daddiaco, and I am pleased to be your host for the next half hour. According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the U.S., affecting 40 million adults in the United States age 18 and older, or 18.1% of the population every year. Still, many of these Americans struggle to find the proper strategies to help alleviate themselves of their anxiety and seek out a new perspective on their life. According to EverydayHealth.com, studies have shown that religious practice can actually change the way the brain functions, which demonstrates that a strong Christian faith and regular attendance in a religious institution can help benefit those struggling with these issues. Today, I am joined in the studio by Steve Broome and Ann Schmid, both of whom are the pastors at our Redeemer Lutheran Church. They can each claim over 30 years of experience in the ministry. Throughout the duration of today's program, we will be discussing the role of the role the church plays in anxiety disorders and assisting men and women affected by such difficulties. First of all, pastors, it's a pleasure to
Thank you, Sam.
Get to be on this show today with you guys. So let's start off with the basics in linking faith and anxiety. How do the principles of the Christian faith lend themselves to helping individuals cope with their anxiety?
I think the basis for not only Christian faith but other faiths also is that we are of worth, we matter to our God, and our God is with us. And that's a pretty foundational thing. When you're dealing with anxiety, you're often dealing with a sense of not being worthwhile or being all alone. And so the basis of Christianity kind of speaks against that and says, no, you matter and your God is with you.
Pastor Broome, do you have anything to add to that?
I think we might just want to alternate back and forth.
Yeah, that's fine.
If that's fine. Okay.
So, kind of along those same lines, can you elaborate on how having and maintaining a Christian faith can lead people to gain a new perspective?
We believe in God, we believe in Christ, and that's how we get the name Christian as a church. It changes the way we see ourselves, and it changes the way we see our world to be part of something larger than ourselves, to be part of the community formed by Christ. And we care for people in the church, but we also care for people who have nothing to do with the church, who just have need because they're people.
And how might some of the ways that you help those individuals be?
With need for food, or people who are traveling through the area need some help to get along with gas, we do work like that. We work with poor people through other community agencies in Washington County, with the city mission in particular. And again, these aren't people who are necessarily members of our congregation, but they're people and they have a need, and we see the great value in helping where we can.
So typically, before we move on to the next subject, are these individuals that usually seek out your assistance, or do you seek out them because you've heard that they're needing of some
It's kind of a combination. Some people come to us. We keep the church doors open during the day. We also pay attention to what's going on with the city mission, for example, and with other partners to see how we can be of particular help.
All right, thank you. So moving on, what advice can you offer to our viewers about how they can incorporate like some of the principles of Christianity in dealing with their anxiety?
I think one of the big things, Sam, is having that faith, again, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or any other tradition, helps you see a big picture. We can respond better to the moment and the anxiety right in the moment if remember where we've come from, how God's been with us in the past. In most of our churches in the community this weekend, actually one of the lessons is about that. It goes back generations and says, here's what God did for us here and here and here and here. And because of that big picture, we know we're not alone right now. We know God's still with us right now. And anxiety often just focuses us right in the moment and being overwhelmed right now. So opening up that bigger picture can be a lot of help to people.
So, kind of along those same lines, how can people look to the Bible and maybe some of its messages in helping to kind of relieve their stress, whether it's at an everyday level or if they're really struggling with something more long-term, big picture? Can the Bible play an integral role in that?
Most of what we do with the Bible, Sam, is not simply only to read it on our own, but to read it together and to teach and have sermons and conversations with people. The Bible may be helpful for people to sit down and read, but what does this mean is the important question, and we have a chance to work that through together better, I think. And when we're under stress, it's hard for us to imagine all the possibilities, and I think it is also isolating, as Pastor Schmid said. The question with anxiety is, what am I going to do? What can I do next? And the fear that comes with that makes it hard to think. It certainly makes it hard to be hopeful. So it helps us, I think, to be part of a community and part of that conversation.
So on the other hand, do you see any potential downsides in maybe interpreting the Bible too literally, and how can that kind of work in the opposite way of like adding anxiety?
We can pull out certain verses and we can not see the big picture, and we can wind up seeing the Bible as a book that induces guilt, makes us feel like we're worthy of punishment, that we have a God who is against us. And that all comes from not really reading the whole story, the big picture, not talking with other people about it. The Bible gets misused a whole lot to beat people down, but that's not really what's there. What's there is that God of love who's with us, who loves us unconditionally no matter what we're doing and what we're going through. So yes, the Bible can be misused, as can just about any book.
So what do you recommend that people do in order to interpret it the way it's intended?
The person who started our branch of Christianity, Martin Luther, said you should never read it alone. You always have to be with other people, talking, getting their perspective, because then that will give you a more balanced perspective of what's happening there.
Okay. Now, what if someone is, and the whole topic of this show is faith and anxiety, so if someone wants to seek out the Bible and maybe read some of its messages, but still adhere to the principles of that Martin Luther set out and read it with someone, what if they're living alone, like they went through a divorce or something, and they have no choice but to read it alone? Then what would you suggest?
Yeah, when I say read it alone, I don't exactly mean that literally, like you never should, but that we
That's
seek
kind
out
of what I
other
was wondering.
perspectives.
Yeah.
There are other books, there are other people to talk to, there are different parts of it to
Yeah.
read. I mean, there are wonderful stories in there of people who have endured great things, and that helps us come through when we know that we're not alone, but that we're going through things that other people have come through. So there are lots of ways of expanding it.
All right. Thank you very much for that. So now we're going to move on and talk a little bit about the general role of the church, both like the church in general, the Lutheran Church, and our Redeemer in specific, which I mentioned in the open. If you want more information on that, you can visit their website, ourredeemer-peters.org, in McMurray on Gateshead Drive, right off of 19, pretty centrally located for the area. So let's start off by asking kind of a central question. Why do people come to the church when struggling with their anxiety?
Go on.
Okay. First of all, I would say that part of the antidote here is that Christ calls us into community, into a gathering of people, and that's certainly our outlook and our theology. I think people get isolated to the point where they're driven to distraction, perhaps, or just become overly afraid, and rather than do something desperate, they reach out to logical people, and we're certainly logical people who might help. It's part of our legacy, it's part of our mission and our self-understanding to help other people, and it would feel wrong if we wouldn't do that for our members and for people who need assistance. We're also not going to blame or shame. We're not going to tell people that they must have done something wrong to be in dire straits economically or interpersonally. So they get a good reception in the sense of an opportunity for conversation and care with that, but then also the specific care that we're able to provide in terms of groceries or money or other sorts of food or other supplies.
We're also known. Sometimes it's easier to go somebody you already know. And so especially for our members and for their friends or family members whom they recommend to us, they say, this is okay. This is a safe place to go. It's somebody you can talk to. It's not a threatening thing. And so I think that's why we're often the first people folks come to.
And we're right on Route 19, so we're visible along the state highway.
Definitely. So, what are some outside resources that you might be able to offer if someone presents an issue that either of you aren't trained to deal with?
We are not trained therapists, and we know that. Our role is to listen, and sometimes that's all people need.
Yeah.
If it's more, we do recommend. We know the names of counselors in the area that other people have found helpful. There are other resources we can call on. So yeah, what we can do is to say to people, it's okay for you to go to therapy. It's okay for you to talk to a counselor. This is a bigger issue than you should be able to handle alone. And so relieve their anxiety about even asking for help that way.
Have you ever had people that say, no, I don't want therapy. All I want is someone that can guide me in the right direction faithfully?
Sure.
So like those, how often do people meet with you?
It varies
discuss?
completely, Sam,
Yeah.
on what the issue is.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Now, besides anxiety, like what other issues is it common for you to discuss with other individuals on a
Aging
private
parents,
basis?
dealing with aging parents,
Okay.
raising teenagers.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. And sometimes it's teenagers dealing with their parents. And just all sorts of issues like that. Choosing a job, making a change, dealing with health issues that have changed, all sorts of things. Just about anything in life that brings stress, it helps for people to be able to talk to someone about it. And what we bring in is also that faith side of, where do we call upon God for help here?
Yeah, definitely. And we hope you're enjoying the program. Pastors, we're going to take a few minutes of a break. When we come back, we'll continue to discuss the church's role in helping those with anxiety, as well as we'll get to some of their personal experiences in dealing with those affected. You're watching The Edge on Peters Township Community Television. Welcome back to The Edge. For those just tuning in, my name is Sam Daddieko, and my guests today are pastors Steve Broome and Ann Schmid of our Redeemer Lutheran Church in McMurray. Before we went to break, we discussed how an active Christian faith can help to prevent and treat anxiety. Now we will continue to discuss the church's role in helping those individuals. So I think the last thing we were talking about before I went to break is kind of your capabilities and the positives in why people might seek you guys out and what those individuals might be able to gain from that. And then your limitations, like you're not trained therapists or counselors. So in that regard, there might be other resources that people might want to seek out. So I want to kind of keep on that track. And do you see how the services that you are able to offer reflect on your mission as a church?
Are you talking about the worship services or the other services?
Both. You can elaborate on both. Just in general.
Yeah.
I know that word
the overall
service,
purpose
yeah.
of the church
Yeah.
is to serve others. And that's what Jesus told us to do, is we serve our neighbor. And that's how we honor God. And so both in the worship time, which allows us to hear God's word together and be in community together, have people around us who are praying for us, that's a good supportive foundation for people, whatever we're going through. The other services, as far as listening, counseling, being present with people in difficult times, again, that's just being with our neighbor and serving our neighbor. And for us, neighbor means anybody who's in need. It doesn't mean the people next door. And so overall, just we're called to live in the world and be with other people and serve other people. That's our whole mission.
So, do you, how can, can you compare and contrast maybe your worship services and then the small group settings like your Bible studies and your Sunday school, and why each of those might be an aid to people struggling in different ways? Some of the potential benefits that they might get out of just being there and hearing what you guys have to say, and just how that can maybe, whether it's indirectly or directly, help people with their life.
That's a huge question. I'll take the small group part, you take the worship part, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay.
So one of the advantages of having smaller groups in church, whether it's a Bible study, a Sunday school, a women's group, whatever, is you develop really deep friendships in those groups where you can trust each other and you can share the things you're going through.
That can always be a help to
It is.
anxiety.
It's a very intimate
Always.
kind of help and support. And that's what those smaller groups can provide. We had a Bible study yesterday. We spent a third of the time just catching up with each other and talking about the things that were happening and the things that we needed to pray about before we even got around to the Bible study.
That can be kind of nice.
It was.
Yeah.
You want to talk about how worship is community?
Worship is the gathering of all of us, and I think part of what's helpful there is to see that life goes on with other people and other things in their lives, and the stability and the joys we can celebrate together. All of that calls us out of our anxious self and being stuck with my own concerns, and it helps us to see that other people are living and flourishing, and that they also have struggles and that they're trying to cope with that as we all do. There are moments of just absolute joy, like baptism and weddings. There's also our life together in Holy Communion, where, among other things, we're all on the same level. We're all receiving from somebody else the body and blood of Christ, and it helps be part of something with other people who are in really the same place you are, the same position you are. And that's how we understand our leadership in the Lutheran Church too. We're not like above people at all. We see ourselves as on the same level, simply with a different role in leading worship.
You know, as you said that, one of the things that just came to mind is the bulletin list, this long list of names of people we're praying for. And it's a constant reminder of there are other people who are struggling with issues.
Yeah.
And we're holding them in prayer. We're not the only one facing difficult times. And and we can help them by holding them in prayer and supporting them.
Yeah, and there are opportunities in the worship service too to kind of incorporate your own struggles and everything too.
Yeah.
Like there's that whole prayer section in praying for certain individuals, and then of course your sermon every week. And you can kind of, what I like about your sermons is they're always very relatable. So sometimes I'll be struggling with an issue of my own, and you come in on a Sunday and hear what they have to say. It might go to help, whether you realize it or not.
Sam, you just gladdened my heart in two ways. One, that you listen, and second, that as a teenager, they connect. I'm really glad to hear that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about now, how do you think, how can individuals reach out to you? What's the most typical means of doing that? The people just come in randomly and say, hey, pastors, or do they just show up to church, or what's typical?
It's everything. It's somebody walking in off the street and saying, is there a pastor here I can talk to?
So people have done that before.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
And if we're there and available, we're there. Yeah, that's fine. People call, people make appointments, people stop us after church. Sometimes it's in the grocery line at Giant Eagle because I have my collar on and somebody knows I'm a pastor and they start a conversation. So yeah, all sorts of ways.
Yeah, so we're going to move on now, and thank you for all of that. I'm sure it's very helpful to all of our viewers that might want a perspective. So we're going to now talk about a little bit about your personal experience. We know you're not trained in therapy or counseling or anything. We're going to talk a little bit about some of your personal experiences in dealing with some of those issues, all right? So how do you think dealing with people's issues has shaped both of you as people?
We do get some counseling courses. We're just not trained therapists.
Okay.
So we have a sense of the types of things to ask and how to sort of help people express what they're going through. But a big part of it is the more we live, the more we go through with people, the more you learn. You know, you've walked down that path with someone. Well, the next time you walk down that path, you may know a little better.
Bit more experience.
Right, exactly.
Yep. So how is your training as a pastor, and you kind of just touched on this, but how has that helped you in aiding people with anxiety?
You might think of us, Sam, as first responders. We're like the ambulance, for example. You know, if somebody needs immediate care, hello, we're here. But we don't call the ambulance to change a bandage or, you know, day-to-day ordinary care. In the same way with counseling, we refer people on who have that long-term chronic conversation that they need to sustain to feel better. Being with people in crisis takes a lot of the edge off of that experience for us. So we don't have to sort out our own fears and anxieties so much. We can really more simply show up and focus on the person and the things that they're bringing, and let that be, as is most appropriate, you know, the center of the conversation. That happens all the time. I think I experienced that most of all going to the hospital with people with a lot of medical equipment around, and that can be very distracting, but we've been in that kind of circumstance so often that those things don't, I mean, you're aware of them, but they're not distracting.
Yeah.
In some ways, we're halfway between a friend and a therapist.
Yeah.
Because a friend might give you
I can
good
see
advice,
that.
and they
Yeah.
might just take your side and not be as helpful, but just be a friend.
Yeah, I've had that happen before.
Sure, we all have, and that's what we do as friends. A therapist really knows how to get in deep and deal with major issues.
But they might not do it on such a personal
Right, but
level.
we can also, we can ask the questions. We can not so much give advice, but help you sort out what you're going through. Not so much take sides as say, okay, so what part of this are you struggling with? Where do you need to go with this? What's that mean for you in your life? And sometimes that's what we need, that in-between person.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just going to ask, how do you think maybe seeking out pastors is more beneficial than a counselor? And that kind of answered that question, that you guys kind of have that personal value that maybe not all counselors can really get to. Maybe they can get to some of the deeper roots and issues of anxiety, but sometimes just having someone that understands who you are on more of a personal level and less of like a psychological level can help just as much.
I'd like to respond to that.
No.
Sam, we have the pleasure of having served in this parish for quite a long while, a lot more than a decade. And we've known you, for example, and plenty of other people for that great length of time. And that's not just a psychological assessment. That's the pleasure of seeing you grow through changes that have been good and some challenging too. That puts us in a good position to know people well, to have that familiarity, and also to have that broader picture. So when someone's in crisis, we can also continue to reflect on the rest of their life as well, as they're able and as it's relevant. We don't want to distract, but
Yeah. And someone else might not know
Yeah.
the details of experiences that people have gone through.
I think I would be careful not to say we're better than a
Yeah,
therapist. So
I'm
it's
not-
a different role that we serve.
Yeah.
Sometimes all people need is the person to be with them. to
Yeah,
walk
I'm
with
not
them
getting
through
at
it.
that. I'm saying how is it
Yeah.
different,
Yeah.
and how are there potential benefits from you guys
Yeah.
that you might not get from one of them?
Or that we can provide And
Yeah,
a
or
therapist
maybe-
provides a different kind of service.
Or maybe
Yeah.
aid alongside a counseling
Sometimes.
service. Like it's not one or the
Yeah.
other. People can obviously maybe see their counselor on Saturday, come talk to you on Sunday.
And if that happens, we're very careful that we're not doing the therapist's work, that we're serving as
Yeah.
pastor and
Yeah.
doing that kind of work. Yeah.
All right, so we want to close the show and talk about why do you think your own personal life experiences have helped you in dealing with these struggling individuals? Do you have any interesting experiences that you can share, and how do you think those can tie into everything?
Pastor Broome alluded to that. One of the things is having been in situations before.
Okay.
So when it comes to standing beside a bed where someone's dying with the family, we've been there before.
Yeah.
And it helps us then to make it a less anxious time for them and to walk with them through that. And so there are a lot of life situations where we've been there with people.
Yeah. Now, kind of along the same path, real simple, quick question to wrap up the show. Do you have any rewarding experience that you can share with the audience, and what that might be on someone that was struggling with their life and you helped them and you just saw the positive change? Do you have an example that you can share real quickly?
I think what we just said, especially it's at that time of death, being able to help the family be less anxious and just be present with the person they love and enter into that instead of all the anxiety that can bring. We can help with that.
And you've gone through that probably a good
Absolutely.
amount of times.
Absolutely.
Always nice to have someone there that can do that. So thank you, pastors, for
Thank you, Sam.
talking
Thanks,
with me
Sam.
today.
It's been good to be
It's
with
been a
you.
pleasure having you on the show. Of course, you can always reach out to Pastor Broome and Pastor Schmid. You can stop by our Redeemer, or you can go to their website. Just real briefly, do you have any information you want to share about availability of the church before
I think all the pastors in the community are the same as we are. We're open to people who are in need and come to us.
Okay, so obviously you've got website, email, and all of that has been
and
on
that's out on our
display
sign out front
throughout
yeah.
the show. Yep. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for watching this episode of The Edge. Pastors, once again, it has been a pleasure having you both on the program today. Remember, maintaining a strong Christian faith can be a vital aspect of helping individuals to gain a new perspective on themselves and to alleviate much of their potential anxiety. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to tackle some of the most important issues at the forefront of today's society.